All right, well, I want to welcome everybody to tonight's Ag in the Evening program. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Dr. Jason Banta. I'm the Extension Beef Cattle Specialist stationed at Overton. The topic that we thought we would cover tonight is how much can you afford to feed weaned calves and stocker cattle? Thought this was a good topic heading into the fall, thinking about a lot of people who calve late winter or spring, getting ready to wean calves, as well as anybody who may be retaining ownership of their calves through a stocker phase. And so with that, I'll go ahead and get started tonight. So when I think about feeding cattle, there's some things we definitely have to think about. Are we feeding to increase weight gain of those calves or stocker cattle? Or are we just feeding to meet nutrient requirements and keep those cattle healthy? And depending on what strategy we're wanting to implement will really change the economics and how we may go about feeding those cattle. So the majority of the time I'm going to spend talking about if we're going to consider feeding to increase weight gain. That's what we're going to focus on tonight. And one of the things we have to think about is what is the value of that added weight gain? And we'll talk about that in a minute. We'll talk about what feed costs, and obviously that varies. I'll tell you for the presentation tonight, I figured distillers grains at $452 a ton, or another way you can think of that is 22.6 cents per pound of feed. What's our supplement conversion? And that's going to be a very important thing we talk about. And when we talk about supplement conversion, we're talking about how many pounds of feed does it take to get an additional pound of weight gain. And then based off that amount of feed, we can look at the feed cost and help decide if that's a good investment or not. And then one of the things we really have to think about, especially if we're feeding weaned calves, is what's the impact of those fleshy or on fleshy calves on sale price, and whether it's from a creep feeding situation or whether it's from feeding after weaning. If we get those calves fleshy, meaning they have a little extra fat on them, those buyers are going to discount them. So that's something we have to keep in mind, as well as putting more weight on them, especially if it's adding more flesh, can actually hurt us from a price standpoint, which is just something to be mindful of. So when we talk about value of gain, what exactly is value of gain? Value of gain is just how much each additional pound of weight gain is worth. And so the way we would look at figuring that is if we just said, all right, we had a steer that weighed 522 pounds and he brought $3.04. So that's 522 times 304 is he would be worth $1,587 a head. And these are actual prices that I pulled from the Net Bio Livestock Auction report here previously. Let's say, well, if we took that same steer and added roughly 103 pounds to him, so he's weighing 625, what would it be worth at that point in time? So 625 times 268 would show us that that steer would have a value of $1,675 per head. And so now that we know those two values, we can calculate that value of gain. So 1675 minus 1587 tells us that gain was worth $88 in this situation. How many pounds did we put on the steer? 103. So $88 divided by 103 tells us each additional pound of weight gain in this situation was worth 85 cents. So if we can put weight on cheaper than 85 cents, that could make a little money in that situation. If it costs more than 85 cents to put weight gain on in this situation, we would lose money. Now, obviously, value of gain is something that's going to change. And so when I get asked about feeding recommendations for cattle, I'll calculate a current value of gain, but then I'll also figure, well, what if the value is actually a little more than we predicted or a little less than we predicted when I was evaluating that situation? I will tell you, with that being said, that 85 cents is a pretty good long-term value, as typically we'll see that value of gain on average somewhere between about 70 cents and about $1 per pound. So 85 is a pretty good number just to figure off the top of your head if you want to, but definitely we want to look at current prices and see where that's at. Now, why in general, as cattle gain weight, price per pound goes down, but total value per head goes up. But that's not always the case. And so I'm just going to show you a few examples of that. And so this is actually from a Superior Livestock Auction video sale. So this was a cow-calf producer that had two lots of calves. And the first lot, those calves were weighing 475 pounds, and they brought 356 per pound for a total of 1691 per head. The second group of calves were weighing 515, so they were just weighing 40 pounds more in that situation. They only brought 316 a pound, but look at the per head, 1627. So in this situation, this is the same producer. Calves are being delivered on the exact same day. Those lighter calves actually brought more total dollars per head than those calves that were just a little bit heavier. Now, why that's a little outside of the norm, I think it's very important to point that out that that can happen. And especially back earlier this spring, we saw that happen quite a lot in several different situations. So having more weight doesn't always mean those calves are going to generate more total dollars in income, even though most of the time they will. So looking at some more sale results. So these were net bio sale results from May 20th of this year, and we can look at those trends we talked about. So if I went through and pulled all the groups of number one Charolais steers here, and you can see as weight went up, average weight for that group, price went down per head. But in general, total dollars per head did go up. From that same sale, if we look at the number one black and black baldy calves, we had some situations where total dollars per head didn't actually go up. So if you look at the calves that were weighing 621, they brought 1807 per head. The calves weighing 674 only brought $1,800 per head. So if we had spent quite a bit of money to try to get an additional 50 odd pounds on those calves in this situation, we definitely didn't make any money. So we have to keep that in mind. If we look at results for those same two groups of steers from the March 15th sale, you can see for the Charolais cross calves, the ones bringing 581 pounds actually grossed more dollars per head than the steers weighing 627 pounds in that situation. And then if we look at the black and black baldy calves, even more pronounced in that situation, where the ones weighing 568 actually brought more per head than the ones weighing 577, 628, and within $1 per head of those calves weighing 675. So just things to keep in mind when we're thinking about additional supplementation of cattle to get added weight gain. In general, they weigh more, they're going to bring more, but not always. So let's look at supplement conversion. And so we're going to start here looking at distillers grains. There's been a lot of research looking at supplementation of distillers grains over the last 10 to 20 years. So that's where we'll start tonight. This first study is actually some work out of Arkansas by Dr. Shane Gadberry, the extension specialist up there. And this one's interesting because they actually looked at feeding these steer calves, and they were weighing 485 pounds. They fed them low quality fescue hay for about 82 days during the winter. And so I'll set this chart up for you, and several of these charts will look similar here. But zero supplement means they only got hay, they didn't get any distillers grains. 0.3% means they got 3% of their body weight of distillers grains. 0.6% or 1.2% of their body weight of distillers grains, and then average daily gain. So you can see hay only, those calves were just barely gaining any weight, 0.11 pounds on average there. At 0.3% of body weight, gain went up to 0.99 pounds. And so then we can look at, well, how much additional feed did we feed those calves, and what was that conversion as far as additional feed per pound of gain? So in this situation, on a dry matter basis, for every additional pound of feed we fed, for to get an additional pound of weight gain, it took 1.49 additional pounds of feed. If we convert that to an as-fed basis, that's the way most people are used to thinking about feed. It would take 1.66 pounds of feed. So then I can take my 1.66 pounds of feed to get my additional pound of weight gain, multiply it by the cost of that feed. And in this situation, to get one additional pound of weight gain, it cost me 38 cents. So if value of gain was worth 85 and it cost me 38 cents, that's a good investment in feed in that situation. You can see when we fed those calves more, our weight gain went up, but our conversion actually got worse, meaning it took more feed to get an additional pound of weight gain. So it took 2.52 pounds of feed in that situation, and that would cost us 57 cents. Still would be profitable, assuming a value of gain of 85 cents. If we look at feeding those calves 1.2% of body weight, it took 3.48 pounds of feed. So again, our conversion's getting worse there. And it cost us 85 cents per pound additional weight gain. So basically that was a break even in that scenario. You may be sitting there wondering, why is that conversion getting worse as we feed those calves more? And a big part of that has to do with the composition of that weight gain. So as calves are gaining more, they're putting on more fat. And so as they put on more fat, our conversions get a little poorer. So as a general rule, a lower rate of supplementation, we're going to have a better supplement conversion efficiency. And as we increase the amount of supplementation, that conversion efficiency gets worse, meaning it takes more feed to get an additional pound of weight gain. Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind when we look at these numbers here is this was on cattle being fed low quality fescue hay. We'll look at grazing cattle here in the upcoming slides, and you can see that's going to have an impact on that supplement conversion efficiency. So this is some research from that same paper by Dr. Gadberry, but this time they were looking at grazing these steers on Bermuda grass during the summer for about an 84-day window. They looked at 3 different levels of distillers grains, and the calves were weighing about 576 pounds in this scenario. Now, I will tell you, if you look at 0% distillers grains and pasture only 1.74, that's more than what we would typically see on straight Bermuda grass. A lot of times in Arkansas, a lot of those pastures have a fair bit of crabgrass in them. And with crabgrass, we'll get better weight gain than we will with straight Bermuda grass. So I suspect that's part of what's going on in this situation, but that's not going to impact how we look at our conversions here in a second. So the calves that were fed 0.3% of body weight, it took 4.11 pounds of distillers grains to get an additional pound of weight gain. That cost us 93 cents. So if the weight gain's only worth 85, we would have been losing 8 cents for every additional pound of weight gain we tried to put on those calves. Feeding them just under 0.6% of body weight, conversion went to 6.53. It was costing us $1.48. So most situations you would lose a fair bit of money for each additional pound of weight gain we tried to put on those calves in that situation. This is some more work out of Arkansas by Dr. Paul Beck. This is 4 different studies I'm going to show you here. In each one of those studies, they fed those calves 2.5 pounds of distillers grains. Roughly, with the weight of the calves across those studies, would represent about 0.4% of body weight on intake basis. So in this study, no supplement. In experiment 1 happened to be some heifers grazing Bermuda grass and crabgrass pastures near Hope, Arkansas. No supplement, 0.64. 2.5 pounds of distillers grains increased weight gain up to 1.06. But when we look at our conversion, it took 5.85 pounds of feed to get 1 additional pound of weight gain. So that was costing us $1.32 per pound to get that gain. That's feed cost only. That's not counting any labor or anything like that. The next Experiment 2 happens to be the next year at that same location with heifers again. You can see pasture quality was a little better that year. So 1.39 pounds with no supplement. With the supplement, 1.79. Our conversion was 6.17. So it cost us $1.40 to get an additional pound of weight gain. Experiment 3 would be steers and heifers grazing Bermuda grass near Batesville, Arkansas. Conversion was better in that study, 3.97, but again, costing us 90 cents per pound if that value of gain is only worth 85 or less than 85, still a money losing situation in that case. Experiment 4 would be some steers and heifers grazing non-endophyte infected fescue during the winter and early part of the spring. So you can see weight gain on pasture by itself is better. That just happens to do with the cool season forage versus a warm season forage. Conversion there, 5.56 to 1, so costing us $1.26. So in these studies, at no point in time was it cost effective to supplement those cattle. So if we were just supplementing to increase weight gain, we wouldn't want to do it in any of these scenarios. Now, if you're supplementing replacement heifers to try to reach a target breeding weight, that's a different story. So it really depends on what we're doing in that situation, on how much we want to feed or if we want to feed at all. This is going to be some work out of Overton. This was some work with steers grazing Tifton 85 during the summers of 2014 and 2015. Bigger steers in this situation, so these would be more thinking about some long yearlings that maybe you kept over, or if you looked at buying some calves and then grazing them. So these steers were weighing 836 pounds, 4 levels of distillers grains, 0.25% of body weight, 0.5% of body weight, or 1% of body weight. You can look at our conversion efficiencies at 0.25% of body weight, 4.56 pounds of feed to get 1 pound of weight gain. At 0.5% of body weight, 6.89. And at 1% of body weight, it took us 10.2 pounds of additional feed for each additional weight of, or each additional pound of weight gain there, costing us $2.31. So if it was worth 85 cents a pound and it cost us $2.31, we're losing well over $1 a pound for each additional pound of weight gain that was put on those calves in this situation. A lot of people you'll hear say, well, feed them 1% of body weight. And hopefully what you're starting to gather from the numbers I'm showing here is that's typically not a very cost-effective strategy in most situations. This is one of the more extreme situations, but we'll look at some conversions that are even worse than this here in a minute. So that was all with distillers grains. And I started with distillers grains because that's one of the more cost-effective feedstuffs we can buy in a lot of situations. And one of the feedstuffs we get some of our better conversion efficiencies with. This is some additional work from Overton, from Dr. Roquette. This would be Tifton 85 again, but looking at either corn gluten feed, corn or soybean meal in these situations. And so these were steers and heifers that grazed Tifton 85 during 2005. Pasture only, they were gaining 0.78 pounds a day, 4% body weight intake of corn gluten. Conversion was 5 to 1, 0.8% conversion was 6 to 1 for corn gluten. If we look at corn, 0.4% of body weight, 3.6. 0.8% of body weight, 5. So in this study, a little bit better conversion efficiency with the corn than the corn gluten. That just tells us those cattle really didn't need any additional protein in that situation. There was more protein in the forage than what they needed. But again, if we kind of think about those conversion efficiencies, probably not going to be profitable in those situations. This is some more work from Dr. Roquette, looking at Tifton 85. This would have been during the summers of 2006 and 2007. So 2006, no supplement, 0.82 pounds a day, with the supplement of 0.8% of body weight of corn gluten. 1.6 was average daily gain, but conversion was 7.3 to 1. The next year, he added in additional treatment and included 0.4% corn gluten. So you can see those weight gains, but look at these conversions, 10.8 to 1, 15.8 to 1. One of the things is as our forage quality is better, those conversion efficiencies get worse. And as we think through that, that makes sense because when we have real low quality forage, we're replacing some of that low quality forage with a higher quality supplement. As we have better quality forage, we're replacing some of that better quality forage with that higher quality supplement. But the gap between the supplement energy value and the forage energy value is smaller. So we would expect better conversion efficiencies on lower quality forage compared to better quality forage in general. So some things to look at and think through there, kind of taking it a step further is a concept that we talk about, compensatory gain. And what is compensatory gain? Compensatory gain is just additional weight gain than what you would expect out of a group of cattle because in a previous period of time, we restricted their nutrition. So this happens to be some work out of Amarillo by Jim McDonald and Ted McCullum and their grad students up there. And this was actually a two-part study. So in the first part of the study, the calves were on native range with some distillers grain supplement, but then after that, they put them on wheat pasture. So this is kind of a scenario of somebody buying some cattle, holding them on dry grass, waiting for that winter pasture to come, and then putting them on the winter pasture. So they grazed the dormant native range for 56 days. These were steers weighing 496 pounds, and they fed those cattle 3 times a week in this situation. So if they didn't get any supplement, they gained 0.59 pounds a day. Average per day, if they were getting 0.25% of body weight of distillers grains, and so basically these cattle were being fed every other day, is they gained 1.07, or conversion efficiency was 2.6 to 1, costing us 59 cents per additional pound of weight gain. So just looking at this stage of the study would have been profitable to supplement those cattle. 0.5% of body weight, conversion is not quite as good. Excuse me. So supplement conversion is not quite as good, but it's still good enough to likely be profitable at 68 cents per additional pound of weight gain, and even up to 0.75% of body weight, 3.29 to 1, 0.73 cents per additional pound of weight gain. So again, probably profitable. So if you think back to the low quality fescue hay, we had pretty good conversion efficiencies. If we think about low quality dormant native range, had pretty good conversion efficiencies. But as we got into that better quality forage, those conversion efficiencies went down. Now, here's going to be the real interesting part of the study is what happened when we take these same calves and then put them on wheat pasture after the native range. So I left the feeding rates here. They were not fed while they were on wheat pasture. They only got wheat pasture only. So this is the feeding rate while they were on the native range. For reference, the average daily gain while they were on the native range. And one kind of important thing I want to show here, what was their final body weight coming off of native range in that situation. So you can see the difference between the highest supplement group, those calves that came off native range weighing 549 pounds. The ones that weren't supplemented came off native range weighing 483 pounds for a difference of 66 pounds there, all right? Now, all these calves went on wheat pasture. The calves that did not get supplemented while they were on native range gained 1.99 pounds a day. The ones that got 0.25% of body weight gained 1.6, 0.5% of body weight 1.74. That's a little unexpected, a little higher than what we would expect in that situation. Not as far as wheat pasture, but relative to the other performances here. And then 0.75% of body weight 1.62. What I want you to notice is the pattern here, all right? The more those calves gained on native range, the less they tended to gain while they were on wheat pasture. And that's what we mean by compensatory gain, is the calves that didn't get any supplement on wheat pasture, or excuse me, on native range, they were restricted from a nutritional standpoint. So they had some compensatory gain when they got on the wheat pasture. And so they did better than those calves that were actually supplemented while they were on native range there. So that's something else. Any of you that visit with me, I always ask, well, what are you going to do with the calves? And I'm thinking about this potential compensatory gain when we're thinking about how we supplement them, if we're just going to have them on stockpile forage or hay before we go into ryegrass or oats or wheat pasture or something like that with those calves. If we look at final body weight of those calves coming off wheat pasture, remember all of them started the study at the same weight, is the ones that got no supplement on native range once they came off wheat pasture were at 626. Interestingly, the ones that did get 0.25% of body weight on native range were still at 626, 655, 657. The difference between the high and the low group here is 31 pounds. And so that has to do with compensatory gain in those situations. So what are some other things we need to think about from a forage standpoint in animal performance on these types of animals? Stocking rate is really big, and stocking rate is typically going to have a bigger impact on performance than what supplementation will. So this happens to be some work again by Dr. Roquette at Overton. This was a 2-year study, so 97, 98, and then again 98 and 99, looking at rye and ryegrass overseeded on Bermuda grass, graze those cattle roughly 150 days on average. Now they did use quite a bit of nitrogen in this study, maybe a little bit more than what some people will use. That's okay. We can still see what we want to look at from an average daily gain standpoint. Just realize that the total gain per acre is a fair bit higher because of the additional amount of nitrogen and the more forage that was grown. If you don't put that much nitrogen on, we just can't run quite as many cattle, and so our gain per acre is going to be less. So 3 stocking rates, 1.6 head, 2.2 or 2.8 head per acre. And this would be of steers weighing about 600 pounds when they started. So on the low stocking rate, those calves were gaining 2.95 pounds a day, generated 743 pounds of gain per acre in that situation. So paid for all that fertilizer in that situation. The medium stocking rate, look how much that average daily gain dropped, went from 2.95 to 2.12. More calves out there, or a little bit more out there. They just aren't as able to be as selective as what they graze, but still okay. 740 pounds of total gain per acre. At that higher stocking rate, so overstocked a little bit in that situation. Notice the weight gain here, 0.096. Just from a stocking rate standpoint, the exact same forage here, weight gain went from 2.95 pounds a day to 0.96 pounds a day. So that's what I mean. Just by your stocking rate, you can really have an impact on what those cattle are gaining or not gaining in that situation. And even though we had more cattle out there, we produced way less total gain per acre because the average daily gain dropped so much in that situation. This is some work from Oklahoma State looking at livestock weight gain on native tallgrass prairie back from 1989 to 1991 with either continuous or rotational grazing here. The big thing I want you to take away from this slide is notice as we increase that stocking rate, so basically we're putting more pounds of animal per acre, whether we're under rotational grazing or we're under continuous grazing, we're reducing animal weight gain, animal performance in that situation. Now, you may also be looking and notice that the cattle that were managed under rotational system didn't do quite as well as those managed under a continuous grazing situation. That doesn't mean that we want to go to just continuous grazing. because there's some other reasons that rotational grazing is real beneficial from an operational standpoint. What that tells us is with rotational grazing, we tend to keep those cattle on a specific pasture or part of that pasture too long, and we really need to move them a little quicker than what's typically done in most situations. So that's all feeding if we're trying to increase weight gain. What if we're just feeding to meet nutrient requirements, or we just need a little bit of limited weight gain in that situation? So for weaned calves, my goals during the weaning period would be to keep those calves growing at a moderate rate of gain. Half a pound to a pound and a half a day is plenty. We don't need to try to get 2 or 3 pounds of weight gain. Now, if we're doing that with really good forage, that's great. But from a supplementation standpoint, as we saw earlier, that's likely not going to be cost effective. We want to keep our costs down, we want to keep that rumen healthy, and we want to optimize immune function of those cattle. With weaned calves or stocker cattle, either one, we want to make sure we provide a properly formulated, complete mineral. In most situations, the same mineral we're using for the cow herd can be used for those weaned calves. So let's say you need to wean those calves and keep them for 60 days so you can put them in a preconditioned calf cell. Don't need a special mineral for them at that point in time. You can just use the same mineral you're using on the cow herd. We want to make sure we plan our grazing program so that we have high quality pasture available where we're going to wean those calves. That's really important. So we want to plan ahead in that situation. We don't want that weaning pasture to be too big. Somewhere 10 to 20 acres works well in most situations. We don't want to turn those calves out into a 100-acre trap, or if we're further out west into a trap that's a section or bigger in that situation. Good stockpile forage is fine. So if we stockpile forage correctly, meaning for most producers, we have that forage down to 3 to 6 inches. The first part of September, we apply 40 to 50 pounds or 40 to 60 pounds of actual nitrogen and let that forage grow till first frost, and then we're grazing it after that. That can work well on those calves. So we don't have to necessarily have growing forage. Good stockpile forage can work. The graph down here on the bottom left kind of shows you the quality that forage can be in the fall. So again, this is some work looking at forage digestibility at Overton, and this happens to be for coastal Bermuda grass, common Bermuda grass, as well as Pensacola Bahia grass. And just realize the more digestible that forage is, the higher the TDN value of the forage. So with these warm season perennial forages like this, our highest quality is going to be during the spring. As we get into the summer, that quality goes down. We would see the same pattern if you were making hay. This doesn't have to do with rainfall. This happens to do with temperature. So the higher those temperatures are, the lower quality that forage is. And then we start to pick forage quality back up in the fall. It kind of levels off. And then as we graze those pastures and those calves eat that top third of the canopy, that's going to be our highest quality. The quality goes down. As they eat the next third, the quality goes down even more. And if they have to start eating the bottom third of the canopy, the forage quality is going to go down even more in that situation. But just shows you that stockpile forage, or even that forage that's growing into the fall before we get a frost, can be some of the better quality forage we produce during the year. So if we have high quality pasture available to wean those calves on, we're only going to feed them to teach them to eat. So if it's part of the requirement of the preconditioned calf cell that they have to be broke, we're going to feed them in that situation just to teach them how to eat. Or some people like to feed calves a little bit just to keep them coming up and to make it easier to check on them and count them in those situations and that kind of stuff. In those situations, I'd look at probably feeding a pound to a pound and a half of some type of energy supplement per head per day. Would be a good option on high quality pasture. If we're on real high quality pasture like our cool season annuals and those cattle get really loose, some people talk about, well, they're too loose, they're not going to gain weight. That's not accurate at all. The reason those calves are loose is because there's more protein in the forage than they can utilize. It doesn't hurt anything. Putting hay out there to quote unquote slow things down isn't going to help performance in that situation. It's not actually going to slow things down. If you want to have a little hay out there just to help get those calves used to that forage, that's fine, but realize it's not really going to help you from a weight gain standpoint in that situation. If we're on medium or low quality pasture, we're going to feed to increase intake and digestibility of that forage. And so in that situation, I want to look at feeding a pound to up to about a pound and a half of a high protein supplement. So something like cottonseed meal, soybean meal, what I would call a 40% protein cube. And realize when I say a 40% protein cube, the tag's going to range from about 38 to 41%. So 40% is just kind of a generic term in that situation. But cottonseed meal, soybean meal, 40% cube works real well on medium or low quality pasture. If we're having to put those cattle in a dry lot top situation and we're using high quality hay, again, we're only going to supplement grain to improve gains just a little bit or teach cattle to eat. Look at 1 to 3 pounds of an energy supplement in that situation. If we were on lower quality hay, we would do our pound to pound and a half of cottonseed meal in that situation. Cattle are not designed to eat out of self-fed feeders. So I much prefer feeding those weaned calves by hand, meaning we're putting out how much feed each day rather than a self-fed situation. If you are going to do a self-fed situation, you really need to work with Cargill or Purina and make sure you get a limiter mixed in there and get it done correctly. If you don't do it correctly, you can really have some problems with those calves. You can create some subacute acidosis, which both of those can lead to liver abscesses, founder, reduced performance of those calves, as well as death. So really prefer hand feeding, especially on those weaned calves. And even if we're going to end up giving those calves some energy supplement, I like to actually start them on a high protein supplement first until I get all the calves in the group eating pretty well. The reason being is from an acidosis standpoint and a rumen pH standpoint, these high protein supplements are much safer. So let's say if we're targeting a pound of cottonseed meal per calf, and we have some calves that don't eat anything and some calves that eat 2 or 3 pounds, with a high protein supplement, that's not near the concern it would be compared to if we were feeding some other type of feed. So I really like starting those calves on a little bit of cottonseed meal or 40% cubes. 40% cubes are made out of cottonseed meal most of the time. So either one of those two works really well to start those calves off with. So that's what I wanted to talk about tonight. Hopefully that gives you a better understanding on why we make some of the recommendations we do on supplementing calves and some of the things you have to be aware of as far as what that supplement costs and whether it makes sense to try to put additional weight gain on those calves or if we want to minimize how much we supplement them. So with that, happy to take any questions about tonight's presentation or any other beef cattle related questions you have. Feel free to go ahead and unmute and ask those questions or put those questions in the chat box. So, all right, well, I'm not seeing any additional questions, so I think we'll go ahead and end tonight's meeting and just want to thank everybody again for joining and hope you have a good week.